Hello, good evening to all. We will wait for 5 more minutes so that other ones can join. Then we will start. Okay.
Definitely, sir.
Huh? What are you saying?
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. We'll.
Okay. Okay, so we will start now. First, we will go with the revision of the previous week lectures. Then we will solve some problems based on the previous week lectures. Okay. So, are you able to see the screen? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Okay, it is moving.
Yes, sir. It's visible.
Okay. Okay, so now we will talk about the transformation of municipal solid waste into compost. Okay, so this is the composting process is known as biological transformation. There are generally three types of biological transformation. One is composting, and then second one is anaerobic digestion. So in composting, what we are creating, creating uh, we are converting the municipal solid waste into some solid valuable compound which is known as compost material. Okay, while in the anaerobic digestion, what we are going to do with municipal solid waste, we will convert it into some gaseous components. Okay, so that gas can be reused as a fuel material. So these are two different types of biological transformation. So as of now, we will talk about the composting process. So first we will discuss about the what is compost and what are the different phases which are present in the compost material. So composting is defined as a biological decomposition and stabilization of organic substrate under conditions that allow development of thermophilic temperatures as a result of biologically produced heat. Okay, so we are providing some heat around 80 to 90 degrees Celsius, not more than that, but that heat will be produced due to the biological transformations. Okay, to produce a final product that is stable and free of pathogens, plant seeds, and can be beneficially applied to land. So why we need it free of pathogens or plant seeds? Because we don't want to create foul odors or some bacterial infection in our crops. Okay, because where we are going to use this compost, obviously in our crops. Okay, so what will happen during the composting process, we will mix the waste material, we will mix the waste material containing carbon, nitrogen, some inorganic matters, or it can contain some pathogens or microbes like that, and then we are providing some oxygen atmosphere to it. Okay, so during the reaction process, what will happen? Water vapors, heat, CO2 and other gases will generate during the composting process. And after curing of this compost material, we will create some humic substance or inorganic microorganism. Okay, so we are providing some organic materials and oxygen. Then this is creating energy, CO2 and H2O gases, and it is going to convert into the compost material. So this is going to be the temperature profile, like when we are going with, it will take some weeks. Okay, it can take up to 5 to 6 weeks to convert your municipal solid waste or some other solid waste or like kitchen waste into the compost material. So during these uh, during this whole time the temperature will vary. Okay, so in first week during so there are three different phases during the transformation of this municipal solid waste into the compost material. uh, One is, first is mesophilic and then second is thermophilic phase. So in mesophilic phase the temperature will be at around will increase from 20 or 10 degrees Celsius to up to 70 degrees Celsius, and it will happen up to around 2.5 weeks to 3 weeks. Okay, and in this time period the decomposition will happen. Okay, then after that, we will go with the thermophilic phase from 2 to 3 weeks, or we can say 2 to 4 weeks. So in this phase, what will happen? The CO2 gas generation will become lower. While in the uh, as the time is increasing, the CO2 gas generation is increasing, then it is getting constant, and after some uh, around 3 or 4 weeks, the CO2 gas generation will become lower, and decomposition is happening at around 60 to 70 degrees Celsius, maximum at around 70 degrees Celsius. Then it is going to decrease, and temperature is also going to decrease as the time is getting increased. So there are two different phases. One is mesophilic, then thermophilic, and again we will gone to mesophilic phase. Then there is heat inactivation at higher temperatures. What will happen? Non-pathogenic organisms survive by forming endospores, thick-walled spores that are highly resistant to heat, cold, dryness, or lack of food. They are ubiquitous in nature and become active whenever environmental conditions are favorable. The numbers and types of mesophilic microbes that recolonize compost and it matures depend on what spores and organisms are present in the compost, because when we are going to increase the temperature, so if enough number of spores and microbes are present, so that will create a suitable environment for the composting process. If the suitable number of microbes is not present during that transformation, so the transformation from municipal solid waste to compost will not happen. Okay, so there are some average bacterial populations during composting can be, or during heat inactivation phase can be around 10 to 6 to 10 to the power 12 for bacterial population, or fungal population has to be in between 10 to the power 2 to 10 to the power 5. Then there are some functional groups which is present during the functional group of organism during the composting process. One is organic residues. These are basically leaves, grass clippings, or other plant debris, food scrap, kitchen waste, and so on. Then primary consumers. Then there are some primary consumers like organisms that feed on these organic residues. These are basically bacteria or fungal bacteria, different types of bacteria, and different types of fungi. Then there can be snails, slugs, and your protozoas, metamorphoids, and then there are some secondary consumers. These secondary consumers will eat on primary consumers. Okay, so these are not necessary. Okay, we need them in the lower we need them to be in the lower number, so that our organism primary consumer, because what will happen, the primary consumers are going to convert that material into the compost material. Okay, and these secondary consumers are feeding on these primary consumers. So these are springtails, featherwing beetles, and some types of mites, nematodes, and protozoas. Then there are some tertiary consumers who are feeding on these secondary consumers. So these are centipedes, predatory mites, rock beetles, and pseudo scorpions. Then there are some compost microorganisms like compost micro. If we will be only able to see them if we are going to magnify that compost material up to 1,000 times under a microscope. So there are some compost microscopes like actinomycetes, fungi, bacteria, and the number of these can vary per gram of compost material. Like actinomycetes can vary around 100,000 to 100 millions per gram of compost. Then fungi can be around 10,000 to 1 million per gram of compost, and bacteria can be around 100 million to 1 billion per gram of compost. Then there are invertebrates. The number of invertebrates can vary according to the composting size, and these lives in water films, and the size of these can vary. Like microfauna can be less than 0.1 nanometer, then mesofauna 0.1 to 2 millimeter, then macrofauna 2 to 60 millimeters. Then there are some phase of composting. Composting generally proceeds in three phases. First is lag phase, then active phase, and at last curing phase, or we can say mature phase. So what will happen during these phases? So during, if you are considering any type of kitchen waste, or we can say any type of organic waste material, so that will contains different types of components in that waste. That can be sugar, protein, fat, cellulose, hemicellulose, or lignin material. So as we can see in this graph, the sugar will be the first to get decomposed, then followed by the protein content, then fat content, cellulose, hemicellulose content, and lignin will be the last to get decomposed during the composting process. And initial lag, there are three different phases like lag phase, active phase, or curing phase. So lag phase is known as an initial lag period, then a period of active phase is known as a period of exponential growth and accompanying intensification of activity. So in this phase, mainly that composting process will happen due to the presence of bacteria and different types of fungi. Then coming to the third phase, eventually tapers into one of final decline, which contains until ambient levels are reached. This is known as curing phase or maturation phase, that can vary from 2 to 4 weeks. Generally, lag phase vary from 1 week, half to 1 week, then active phase from 1 to 2 week, and curing phase vary from 3 to 4 weeks around. Then this lag phase begins as soon as composting conditions are established. Then microbes begin to proliferate by using sugar, starches, simple cellulose, and amino acids present in the raw waste material. Then pseudomonads are in abundant in this phase, while protozoa and fungi are not discriminable. This phase is very brief when puriticide and herbivorous waste are involved, somewhat longer when woody and or MSW waste are involved, and very protected with dry leaves and resistance waste such as dry hay, straw, rice hulls, and sawdust. Then coming to active phase, this will exponentially in this phase exponentially increase in microbial numbers will happen, and activity will be manifested by precipitous and uninterrupted rise in temperature of the composting mass can be observed, and the peak temperature can be observed at around 70 degrees Celsius during this phase, and the duration of entire active range varies with substrate and with environmental and operational conditions. So the duration of lag phase was varying according to the composition of the waste material, and the active phase is varying according to the duration of active phase is dependent on the environmental and operation condition. Then mature or carrying phase, when the easily decomposable material is depleted, maturation stage begins. The proportion of resistance material steadily rises and microbial proliferation correspondingly declines. Temperature begins and an inexorable decline which persists until ambient temperature is reached. So during active phase, the temperature has peaked up to around 70 degrees Celsius, and during this curing phase, the temperature will again begin to decline, and it will decline until it reaches the ambient temperature like 25 or 30 degrees Celsius. The time involved in maturation is a function of substrate and environmental and operational conditions. So that will also depend on the function of substrate and environmental or operational conditions like active phase. Then coming to the second lecture of the previous week. So there are some different factors which affect this composting process. So one of the major factors which is going to affect the composting process is obviously temperature. As we had already discussed, the temperature is going to increase from 25 or 30 degrees Celsius to a maximum up to 70 degrees Celsius, and again that 70 degrees Celsius is again going back decline to around 25 or 30 degrees Celsius. So as an environmental factor, temperature affects the well-being and activities of the microbial population, because your according to your temperature, the growth of fungi and bacteria will takes place. Okay, so that will majorly depend on the temperature profile. The curve of composting process efficiency and speed flattens between 35 to 55 degrees Celsius and are negligible at temperatures above 70 degrees Celsius, because above 70 degrees Celsius what will happen, your bacteria and fungi are not going to sustain. Okay, and these two things are taking the major part during the composting processes. Okay, so at higher temperatures around 65 degrees Celsius, most non-spore formers die off and spore formers enter the spore stage and as such dormant. So what will happen, your composting process will not be happening at around 70 degrees Celsius or 75 degrees Celsius. So you need a temperature around 65 or 60 degrees Celsius for a proper composting process. So here is a temperature profile. So this is initial phase. So in initial phase, your fungi and bacteria growth will increase. Then this is thermophilic phase at around 60 to 50 to 70 degrees Celsius. So what will happen? Degradation of soluble compounds, and then coming to mesophilic or nature phase. What will happen? In this phase, mainly degradation of resistance polymers will happen, and fungi and actinomycete will again increase. So these stars are indicating the phases when the removal of pathogens or microorganisms takes place, because at a higher temperature your fungi and bacteria are not going to sustain, so these are going to remove from the system. Then most important one of the most important factor of considering while the composting process is moisture content of the material. So that moisture content has to be at around 50 to 60% in when we are going for the composting process, because almost all biologically activity ceases at moisture content lower than about 12%. Because if moisture will not be there, so microbial activity will not happen, and if microbial activities are not going to happen, so what will happen? There will be no growth of bacteria and fungi, and these are taking the major part during the composting process. So microbial induced decomposition occurs most rapidly in the thin liquid film found on the surface of the organic particles. Then whereas too little moisture, less than 40%, inhibits bacterial activity, too much moisture, yeah, in short greater than 65%, results in slow decomposition, odor production in anaerobic pockets, and nutrient leaching. So we need a temperature content at around moisture content at around 50 to 60% for the proper microbial action and to convert the municipal solid waste or kitchen waste into the compost. Then one more important factor is there, that is particle size. Okay, so microbial activity generally occurs on the surface of the organic particles, and we already know. So it means more amount of surface, if there is more amount of surface is there, okay, so more microbial activity will happen, and due to that more microbial activity, what will happen? The solid waste is rapidly going to convert into the composting phase. So if we want to increase the surface area of the particle size, so what we can do? We can reduce the size of the material. Okay, the lower the size of the same volume material, the surface area will be much higher. Okay, therefore decreasing particle size though through its effect of increasing surface area will encourage microbial activity and increase the rate of decomposition. On the other hand, when particles are, however, we cannot go with too much smaller particles. Okay, because what will happen? Due to the too smaller particles, and when particles are too small and compact, air circulation through the pile is inhibited. Because what will happen? If the size will become lower, so the porosity, or we can say permeability of the bed will become lower, because they will be too densely packed, and due to that lower permeability, the air circulation through the pile will not happen on a regular manner. This decreases O2 available to microorganisms within the pile, and ultimately decreases the rate of microbial activity. So the recommended particle size for the microbial action, or we can say composting process, is less than 1 centimeter, and it has to be more than around 100 micron, or we can say around 50 micron size. So how we are going to decrease the particle size? We can go for shredding or grinding process. So shredding exposes greater surface area, making more susceptible to bacterial invasion. Shredding material makes it more uniform in size, aerates it, and makes it easier to handle and keep moisture. Fly control is also better when material is pulverized or shredded. Uniform compost made from shredded material is easy for land application. Then coming to the fourth factor, that is aeration. So aeration is also necessary for the survival of the microorganism inside the compost. Okay, so oxygen is a key element in the respiratory and metabolic activities of microbes. The amount
Sir,
of yes,
sir, I guess you missed in the third topic substrate factor.
uh, first
Down,
factor
down.
was temperature.
Yes, sir.
Okay, then second factor was moisture content that has to be in the range of around 50 to 60%. Then third one was particle size, which has to be lower
Yes.
than 1 centimeter. Then this is the fourth one,
Sub,
aeration.
sir, above this, sir, like one slide above. Yes, sir, yes, sir. Substrate. Yes, sir, sir, below. Yes.
Okay, yeah, substrate. Okay, so substrate is also there. Combining the different kind of compost material yields a mix that compost well. So substrate is mainly necessary like in composting process. What we are going to do, we are going to provide any type of organic compounds which can deteriorate. Okay, so that can also contains dry leaves or that can contain some kitchen waste. Okay, so what will happen, your kitchen waste is going to kitchen waste will be having more amount of the moisture content around, it can contain around 70 to 80% moisture sometimes. Okay, while dry leaves, okay, that is majorly a garden waste. Okay, so that is going to have very lower amount of moisture content, only around, we can say around 5 to 10% moisture will be there in dry leaves, or sometimes it can be negligible. Okay, so that is the most important part, how well we are going to mix them up. Okay, to create a proper composition, like we need a constant moisture content of around 50 to 60%. And one more thing is there, because these all materials will vary according the composition, or we can say elemental composition, like in organic material what we talk about majorly carbon and nitrogen content. Okay, so the content of carbon and nitrogen is going to vary according to your different waste materials. Like your dry leaves will contain more amount of carbon material as compared to your kitchen waste material, because kitchen waste material we can say kitchen waste material will contain more amount of protein. Okay, because these are food materials, and food materials generally contains major amount of amino acids or carbohydrates. Okay, so amino acids contain more amount of protein, and it will be on the, we can say, elemental composition of the nitrogen will be on the higher side as compared to your dry leaves, because dry leaves are majorly defined as a lignocellulosic material. Okay, so that will contain more amount of lignin, and in the lignin content there will be the high elemental composition of carbon and hydrogen. So we have to keep in mind two different things. One is moisture content, we have to control by uh, mixing up these different substrate, and second thing is carbon to nitrogen ratio. Okay, that we have to also consider during the composting process. Okay, the kitchen garbage that can be seen, kitchen garbage particularly, which tends to be soft and fairly high in nitrogen, can be dug into the center of a hot pile where it will disappear within days. Okay, then for the moisture control, we can also add some sewage sludge, although it will not contain much more amount of the carbon or hydrogen percentage, because sewage sludge will contain more amount of the inert material. Okay, but for controlling moisture content, we can add some sewage sludge, or we can say add some biosolids for the moisture controlling during the composting process. Then fifth factor is aeration content. So we had already discussed the oxygen content. Optimum oxygen content is required for the microorganism to survive during the composting process. So we have to provide some proper aeration during the composting process. Oxygen is a key element in the respiratory and metabolic activities of microbes. The amount of oxygen required by the microbes is termed as oxygen demand. Then temperature, moisture content, size of bacterial population, and availability of nutrients are some of the key factors that influence oxygen demand. Because according to these different factors, you are going to require uh, like the number of microbes required to convert it into compost will vary. Okay, according to your temperature, moisture content, and size of bacterial population. So, according to your size of bacterial population, you are going to require the amount of oxygen required to survive for those bacterial populations. Okay. So for providing proper aeration, what we have to do, we have to regularly do the turning and mixing of the compost pile. Okay, wherever we have created a pile of that solid waste material, so uh, we have to turn and mix it properly within every 3 days, or we can say 5 days or 10 days. That will require that will be depend on the conditions during the composting process. Okay. So as we can see in the graph, if the temperature is high during the composting process, then we have to turn the material every 3 days. If the temperature is in the range of around 120 to 140 Fahrenheit, then we have to turn it every 10 days. And then if the temperature is in between around 100 to 120 days, then we have to turn it every 30 days. Then the inside of the pile gets the hottest. So if the pile is mixed frequently, the decay of the matter will be more even. Because what will happen if the temperature is going to be on the higher side around 70 degrees Celsius or 65 degrees Celsius. So what will happen? The microorganism will uh, be going to die at that temperature. And what will happen? Due to the death of the microorganism, at that particular temperature, what will happen, the inside of the pile is not going to get converted into the compost. Okay, so if we are going to mix it properly, so what will happen, the temperature will again get reduced. Okay, so microorganisms will reach to the hottest part of the pile also, so that it can convert them into the compost material. By turning, oxygen is allowed to get into the pile, which will allow these microorganisms to breathe. It also decreases the chance of buildup of anaerobic bacteria, which adds to a stinky compost. Okay, then coming to the nutrients that we have already talked about, carbon nitrogen ratio during the substrate. So that is also a major factor for the compost making. So the ideal carbon nitrogen ratio has to be around 30 raised to 1. It means 30 part carbon and 1 part has to be nitrogen. So carbon, what is carbon? Carbon is basically a source of energy, and nitrogen is building cell structure. Nitrogen is required for building cell structure. So carbon, if carbon nitrogen ratio, as we can see in the graph, if carbon nitro so what will happen during the process, during the decomposition process, what will happen, your nitrogen content of carbon is going to get decreased. Okay, because that is going to convert into the compost material. Okay, so as you can see with the decreasing time, first phase is growth, so your carbon nitrogen ratio was around 30. Then during active stabilization process, your uh, matter is going to carbon matter is going to decompose, and it will create some CH4 gases, or maybe sometimes some CO2 gases, due to the presence of oxygen during the whole process, and carbon content is going to get reduced. However, your nitrogen content is remaining same. So what will happen, up to the maturation stage, we have started with C/N ratio of around 30, and during the maturation state, it will become around C/N ratio around less than 15. Okay, so your nitrogen content is thriving, but carbon is going to get decomposed during the whole process. So if C/N ratio of compost is more, the excess carbon tends to utilize nitrogen in soil to build cell protoplasm or robbing of soil. If C/N ratio is too low, the resultant product does not help improve the structure of the soil. So that has to be on a proper manner. Around C/N ratio has to be around 30. Okay. Then compost ratio. compost ratio, like they are for maintaining that carbon to nitrogen ratio, we have to maintain the brown to green ratio. Okay, so brown content, what we are talking about, brown content are majorly dry leaves, we can say, or maybe woody material, while the green content is basically your grass material, your kitchen waste, that are majorly a source of the nitrogen content, so they are green material. Okay, so that has to be maintained during the composting process. uh, then we will go for the third lecture. So now we will talk, we have talked about what was composting. We have talked about different factors affecting the composting process. Now we will talk about the types of composting processes. Okay, so yeah, so there are two types of compost system. Uh, One is open process, then second one is reactor process. So in open process, we can differentiate it in between two parts: agitated pile and then static pile, or we can say aerated pile. Then in reactor process, it can be vertical flow, horizontally inclined reactor, or non-flow batch reactor. So uh, if we are talking about the technological aspect of these composting processes, so in agitated or windrow type composting process, very low technology is required, while in aerated or static pile we require some medium level of technological process, because uh, we have to provide the aeration in the compost pile with the help of some machineries. Okay, then then in reactor type process, we require very high technology, like we require some rotary drum composter. In case of rotary drum composter, we have to rotate that composter regularly, which requires very high machineries. And then box or tunnel composting is also required some higher level technologies. Then coming to the agitated and windrow composting. So as we can see in the figure, what we have done, we have compiled, we have make we had made the piles of the waste. Okay, and we have given some spaces between these piles. Okay, so due to these spaces between these piles, what will happen, the air is passing regularly. Okay, so that's why it is known as agitated or windrow type composting. Okay, then in windrow type system, we can with the help of some machine, we can we can turn it time to time for the proper aeration systems. Okay, and we have given some gap between these piles, so that machine can move, okay, between these gaps. Then coming, there has to be some calculation of total area of windrow pad, that require total volume of feed stock, total volume of first we have to calculate the total volume of the feed stock, then area occupied solely by windrows. So that can be in different shapes. Okay, so according to the different shapes of these pads, we can calculate the base area required for the for making the windrow pad. Okay, these are just like we can easily calculate the volume from we can consider this as a cubical system, and with the help of that cubical system, we can calculate the total volume of the material, and based on the total volume of the material, we can calculate the area required for making this type of windrow pad. Similarly, in other type of geometries also, we can calculate the area occupied by the windrows. uh, then we can determine the number of windrows also based on the we have calculated the area of windrows required. So if we know the length of that windrow, okay, if we know about the length of the windrow, and we know about our feed stock volume, so we can calculate the number of windrows required for that total waste material to convert them into the compost material. Then okay, then we had talked about agitated windrow. Then we will talk about the aerated. So we can provide aeration in window system from these types of systems also. As we can see in figure, they are providing the aeration in the window system via. pipes. Okay, so on the end of these pipes they have provided some pump, or we can say compressor, so which is going to compress the air from the atmosphere, and we are going to provide that air content on the with a high pressure, so that air content is going to agitate this pile and providing the proper oxygen content on the inside of the windrow pile. Then community level composting, these are okay. So I think about these reactor type process, we will talk about these processes in the next week lectures. So now we will shift towards the some problems based on these lectures. Okay, so are you able to see the screen? Can you able can you see the slides?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, give me 1 minute. Okay. So first question is, which of the following phases of composting microbial profile decline? Any answer?
Option B.
So we are talking about the microbial profile declines. Okay. So in mesophilic phase, that was going to decrease. Okay, and although in thermophilic phase it is going to get declined due to the temperature. Okay, but we are providing around 65 to 70 degrees Celsius temperature is there in thermophilic phase, but the main decline will be during the curing phase of that composting process. Okay, in the curing phase, the rate of the uh, decline of these microbial profile will get increased during the curing phase. So answer is D. Okay. So second question, which part of the composting process involves active stabilization? No. The active stabilization was happening during the thermophilic phase. Okay. Then third one, in which phase of the composting process humus is produced?
Option C.
No. The humus was producing during the mesophilic phase, because the microbial profile is increasing during that phase. Okay, producing the more amount of humus content. Then in maturation phase, what will happen, because during that thermophilic phase your bacteria are going to die rapidly. Okay, and after that maturation phase, what is we are going to do during that maturation phase, we are providing the proper aeration. Okay, so that can moisture content and CO2 gases, okay, whatever the gases present there, can get outside from the system. Okay, so the humus phase was majorly producing during the mesophilic phase. Then what are the products released after curing phase of the composting? Yes. Huh? Yes, CO2. Then the average bacterial population during composting. So we have talked about A. Yes, it has to be 10 to the power 6 to 10 to the power 12. We have talked about two different microorganisms during the composting process. One was bacteria, then second one was fungi. Okay, so the population of these varies. Okay, during the composting process. So the bacterial population has to be in the range of 10 to the power 6 to 10 to the power 12. Then fungal population. Yes, it was in between 10 to the power 2 to 10 to the power 5. Which of the following are the secondary consumer present in compost? So we have talked about uh, A. Yes, springtails are the secondary consumers, and snowbugs, centipedes, and predatory mites. These are These are tertiary consumers. We had talked about three different consumers. One was primary, majorly consisting bacteria and fungi. Then secondary consumers, which are feeding on the primary consumers, which can so springtails can be a part of these secondary consumers, and then tertiary consumer, which were feeding on the primary, mainly secondary consumers, but they can feed on primary consumers also. Okay. In which phase of composting pseudomonads are found? Yes, in lag phase pseudomonads are found because during active phase or curing phase they are going to die, because during active phase what will happen, the temperature will get increased up to around 65 to 70 degrees Celsius, and due to that increment in temperature, what will happen, the pseudomonads will not be able to sustain at that temperature. Okay, so they will die at that temperature. uh, what is the optimum moisture content required for composting? uh, yes, it has to be around 50 to 60%. If moisture content is not optimum, so what will happen? uh, the growth of fungi and bacterial which will not be able to takes place. Okay, because the growth of bacteria, fungi are only able to takes place at the uh, thin film thin film of moisture which is created on the surface of your municipal solid waste particles, or we can say kitchen waste or whatever type of waste we are providing them. So a thin film of moisture, if a thin film of moisture is there on the surface of these particles, so due to that moisture content, the fungi and bacterial growth will takes place. So we required an optimum temperature of around 50 to 60%. Okay. Then what is the desirable organic particle size for composting? Yes, less than 1 centimeter we required for composting for providing better surface area for the bacterial and fungal growth. Then what is the ideal CYN ratio for composting? No, it has to be A, 30. Ideal CYN ratio is 30. Okay. If we are able to maintain the CYN ratio, so the composting will be better. And to maintain the CY/N ratio, what we have to do? We have to mix different substrates. Okay, like we have to mix, if the nitrogen content is on higher side, then we can mix some dry leaves into the solid waste material. Okay, or if the carbon content is on higher side, then we can mix some green. Okay, we had talked about two different composting material, brown waste and green waste. Okay, so brown waste will containing more amount of carbon, and green waste is containing more amount of nitrogen material. Okay, so we have to mix them in properly so that we can obtain a CY/N ratio of 30. Then which of the following is an open process of composting? Yes, static pile is an open process of composting, because vertical flow, we are going with the vessel type composting. Okay, in vessel type of composting, we can go with vertical flow, inclined flow, or maybe batch type reactor. Okay, so static pile is the open process composting process. One was static pile, and second one was, there were two processes. Yeah, agitated, or we can say open windrow pile. Okay, then at what temperature do the non-spore formers die during composting? Yes, above 65 degrees Celsius they were dying, and due to their dying process, what will happen? The composting will not perform in the efficient manner, because microorganisms will get die due to that high temperature. Okay, so this is for today. If you want to ask any questions, you can ask.